So let's talk to Kevin, who says there's no factual evidence to support evolution. Kevin, you're back on the line. Forrest and Justin.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm actually not Kevin, though, but thanks.
Okay, well, when you call in, it uses like either the IP address or the number or whatever you're calling in from. It keeps a record of that, and it lets us know all the other times you've called in. And so you're coming up for us as Kevin from Oregon, who is skirting a ban. That's what we're getting on our side.
Okay. Anyways,
we'll move forward as if there's something wrong with the system, and we'll just assume that that's not true.
Yeah. My handle is Erosion of Earth. You can just call me Mr. Erosion.
Okay.
No free clout.
Whatever works.
Let's hear the argument.
Yeah. So when you called in earlier, you said that evolution isn't observed and that the definition of species is arbitrary. And that's where we started. And as I said, right after whatever happened and you dropped, I immediately took down these 4 notes that evolution being unobserved is an issue. That tells me that you don't have a good understanding of the definition of what evolution is, especially if you're then going to this concept of species. And also the line of speciation and then what species is also, I think there's a disconnect on. So I immediately have 2 major problems, which I can break down into 4 individual problems with the first thing that you said immediately.
Can I ask you one question really concisely? Do you think that the definition of species is arbitrary?
Necessarily so, yes. But it's also really important to remember that there is no single definition of species.
Okay. Are you familiar with the biologist named Ernest Mayr?
Yes.
So he has a non-arbitrary definition of species, which isn't exactly what the current definition of species is. I think it's much more important to look at his definition, which he defines it as species as a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, effectively being reproductively isolated from other such groups. So it's a reproductively isolated group of organisms.
Right. So just to be clear, Ernst Mayr, that what you just described there is called the biological species concept, and that is the most frequently used definition of species. But across all of biology, that is the number one most used species concept. But it's important to remember that it is still just the species concept, not actually a definition, because there is no such thing as species in a real sense. The reason why it's just a concept is because like I said, it is necessarily an arbitrary categorization that we as biologists are giving this group of organisms that have certain unifying characteristics. There are other species concepts out there that are also functional in different circumstances. For example, if we're talking about dinosaurs, how are you going to tell me which of these dinosaurs were reproductively isolated and which ones could interbreed with other ones? You can't, right? And so we have different fossil species concepts.
If they were alive today, it'd be pretty easy.
We have that's a big old if, right?
Today we can see that they're clearly different and distinctly separate, and there's no intermixing of the fertile offspring.
There absolutely are. And that's the problem with the biological species concept, is that it is just one concept. If we're talking about fossil species, we have to have a different one. We have ecological species concepts where we define species by their place, their niches in an ecosystem. We have, my favorite is the Hanesian species concept, where you define species by their common ancestor. If they split from a common ancestor and then that common ancestor dies, we now call it a different species. The issue is that every single one of these concepts, including the biological species concept, which talks about reproductive isolation, not a single one of them works 100% of the time. Even if we're talking about reproductive isolation, there's still hybridization that happens all the fucking time between species.
Could I get an example of it not fitting?
Yeah, so like for example, a three-toed box turtles here in where I come from, we see a clear distinction between ornate box turtles on one half of the state, simple three-toed box turtles looking plain and drab and gray on the other side, or brown on the other side of the state. They are definitely different species, and yet we get hybrids that are fertile all the fucking time. And so like
Well, no,
there's
no,
a
no, no.
lot of cases.
You just know, but you got to back up 10 steps. How do you know they're not subspecies?
It's because of the way that they're classified as
Oh,
different
which is
species,
arbitrary?
and like I said that a minute ago. You already asked me
Yeah,
that question, and I already said,
we're kind of having a disconnect here because I'm trying to talk about something non-arbitrary, and you're trying to talk about something that are arbitrary and the classification. Someone already classified it, so that's your example. So that doesn't work.
no.
Because they're subspecies, right? So there's subspecies.
What I'm trying to get across
dogs,
to you,
the dingoes, and
what I'm trying to get across to you, Kevin,
coyotes and
is
wolves
that
are all subspecies.
what I'm trying to get across to you is that that's not how the actual definition of species works, because there is no set solid definition of species. What's really important to remember is that we can't go through and try to breed together every single possible combination of every single species to see which ones can produce fertile offspring. It just doesn't work. And so these species lines are necessarily a lot of the times arbitrary. And because we have institutions like the ICZN where we can go in and say, hey, look, we now have evidence that this is a subspecies, not a species or whatever like that, those lines do get redrawn from time to time. For example, there was a big argument for the past couple of decades over whether Neanderthals were a subspecies of Homo sapiens or a completely different species of Homo. And now it's pretty clear that they're a different species, right? And so like we had this category that was based on the evidence that we had, because we can't go back and see if they can reproduce. And then suddenly we had to make them a different species. But here's the misery of it. We have clear evidence that we interbred with Neanderthals and produced fertile offspring. So that's another example of species hybridizing and producing fertile offspring.
You get the definition wrong and then say it's proof for evolution. This is my exact point. They must be subspecies if, according to the concept you call, they are interbreedable. You understand my point?
So I understand what you're trying to say. I really do. But what I'm trying to get across to you is that just simply isn't how the definition of species works. However, I think that if we focus on this too much, we're just going to get into a really semantic, focus on this. I'm going to go pull out several different introductory biology textbooks around me, demonstrate over and over that that's just one concept of species. You're going to continue to reject it. We're going to get nowhere. We can come back to this if you want. I would rather focus on your argument here for evolution, saying that evolution can't be observed because the species lines are arbitrary. That also doesn't make sense.
Can I just make one point? Because it's all interconnected. Let me just make one statement here. And you tell me if there's anything in this statement that you think is incorrect.
Sure.
There is no example of any individual from any species that has sexual reproduction where a chromosomal mutation produces a fertile male offspring.
I don't think that is true.
Okay. I've done research and I think it's completely true. And
you say chromosomal.
You can't prove evolution.
Just to be clear, you say chromosomal mutation, right?
Correct.
Not gene mutation?
No, not gene mutation. I'm talking about chromosomal mutation. Because a big part of understanding what the species is if there's reproductive isolations, and a huge part with reproductive isolations is having a different chromosome, because that makes things way more almost impossible. Every time it makes it impossible.
When you say different chromosome, I need to understand what you're trying to say there, because any gene mutation is necessarily going to change the chromosome. Chromosomes are made of genes, right? And so are you saying that there is now a different, so you're saying a different number of chromosomes?
Yes, a different chromosome count.
Okay, then yes, I know that's not true. I can think of one example off the top of my head of a case study in humans, actually, where a guy had an extra chromosome and a unique place because of a Robertsonian translocation, had a different chromosome count. It wasn't a major. He was able to reproduce. He was as far as I know, he wasn't infertile. But it was just this weird issue that happened because of what we would call oh fuck, there's a name for it. Hold on a second. Haploid repair, I think it is. No, it wasn't a chimera situation.
Okay.
It was that a female somewhere in his lineage had a Robertsonian translocation, and it wasn't noticed until it got randomly there. They had some eventually there was a male great grandchild or whatever like that, and he noticed he had some issues. He had some abnormalities, some sort of clinical presentations of different whatevers. And they looked and they're like, oh shit, you have this extra chromosome. And apparently it's been going on in your family for some time. And so, yeah, he had some issues. He wasn't, he had some health problems because of this. But as far as I know, he wasn't infertile because of it.
Now,
so
here's the point.
That's monosomy, not fucking haploid. Monosomy repair. That's the word I was looking for. Duh. Fucking Jesus. And so if that person were to then reproduce, then you would potentially have an issue where you could have trisomy repair, trisomy recovery in that offspring. It wouldn't necessarily render them reproductively isolated. What you're talking about there is what's called a prezygotic barrier, and it simply isn't as simple as you're making it.
Okay, so let's take a simple example. You've got the ligers, right? So if you've got a liger has the male is the lion and the female is the tiger, and that makes a liger with 38 chromosomes. Both the tiger and the lion have 38 chromosomes, so there's no chromosome change in that. But the ligers are always infertile with the males. So you can have, and this goes with other animals. You can, like, for example, mules and other examples, but you can have the females able to have fertile offspring or not fertile offspring if it's a male, right? So they can only have, but here's the point, is you have to have fertile males in order to have a population. So the idea of hybridization, if you can never have a fertile male, you never have a sustaining new population of hybrids.
So that's the conclusion, even if I accept your premise, because I'm pretty sure when we talk about hybridization with Neanderthals, that is something that we see, if I remember correctly, that if the mom is a Neanderthal but the dad is a Homo sapiens, then you can reproduce. But if it's the other way around, you can't. Like, there are sex lines like that that do exist. However, at the end of the day, if you can't, let's say I accept your premise here, which again, I'm not 100% sure. I don't think what you're saying is true, but let's say I accept what you're saying, right? That you can only have fertile female offspring. Okay, those fertile female offspring still carry a completely different either chromosomal configuration or at the very least a completely different genotype from their individual parent populations, and therefore you are still going to have evolution occur. It's also really important, like, this is what I was talking about a minute ago when I said I'd like to go back to what you're talking about evolution specifically, because I think there might be a fundamental disconnect in what evolution is. It sounds like you're using the word evolution. It sounds like you're using the word evolution to be synonymous with the word speciation.
Yeah, I mean, you would have it be more easy, but if you really want to prove evolution, you'd have to have speciation.
No, you wouldn't.
So here's the point. You want a fact of evolution. If you want to have it be a fact, you would actually have to see species change, not just a little change in hair color or eye color or something like that.
That's not true at all. And it's because, so I am now very confident that you are not familiar with the actual definition of evolution or the actual long-term evidence that we have of it. Because it sounds like you are drawing this really discrete box around one specific hypothetical event that you're wanting to see as like this category, and it's just not true or reasonable. So can you just tell me, like, quickly, what do you think the definition of evolution is? Just give me the textbook definition of evolution.
The origin of species.
No. Incorrect. That is speciation. So it's exactly what I was saying earlier. You were conflating the words
Darwin
evolution and
didn't have
speciation.
evolution as the origin of species.
He named his book The Origin of Species.
And his topic of the book was called what, evolution or not?
Yeah, it was on the origin of species by means of natural selection. So it was about evolution. That was the title of the book, but that was also 200 years ago. And we've learned a lot of shit since then. And you'll be surprised to know that no biologists worship Darwin. He was just a guy who came up with the original. He had a seminal text on the theory, and he got a lot of shit right, and he got a lot of shit wrong. And we've moved on. It's like saying that, I know the planets orbit in perfect circles because that's what Copernicus wrote, and he's the guy who came up with the heliocentric model. And it's like, no, he came up with that idea, and he got some other shit wrong, and then we move on, right? And we learned a lot since then, and now we know it's new stuff. So that's not the definition of what evolution is. And the title of Darwin's book has nothing to do with it.
Okay, can I give you an example about the doors?
I would rather settle on the definition of evolution. I can give it to you, and then we can go from there. Because if you're just going to give me an example of hybrid animals, it's not going to get us anywhere.
Well, I think that it has to do a lot with the topic of your show today is evolution a fact? And
yes,
and I think that in order to make it a fact, if we could actually see species change where they become reproductively isolated, then that would make it a fact. Otherwise, I don't see it as a fact. So I'm telling you from my perspective what I would think would be a fact of evolution.
Okay, but I don't care about your perspective of what you think would be a fact. I would rather focus on the actual definition and then demonstrate that actual definition is a thing and show how it totally lines up with your objection, rather than just saying, well, here's this weird hybrid that doesn't do XYZ thing. That doesn't really get us anywhere.
Okay.
So the definition, the actual definition of evolution is any change in the heritable characteristics of a population over the course of multiple generations. That's the definition of evolution. And so there's a couple things to notice here. Number one, the word species isn't in there. It's about populations, not about species. Species don't evolve. Populations evolve. The second thing is that we're talking about any change in the combined heritable characteristics of that population. So usually we're talking about DNA there. It could be other things, but mainly, more often than not, we're talking about DNA. And so if we're talking about anything that causes a change in the DNA of a certain individual, and then over the course of several generations, the combined total genome of this population is starting to change in favor of that individual change in that one individual, where you see what we would call the allele frequency, that one new allele becoming more frequent among the population. That would be an example of evolution. And that can lead to speciation, but it doesn't have to. And specifically what you're talking about here in terms of populations becoming reproductively isolated, that's just called allopatric speciation. That's not a new concept at all, and it is something that we have tremendous amount of evidence for and can even see in real time as well.
So you're saying speciation has been observed?
Yeah, largely. So the key to remember is we have seen. I'm trying to think of a few examples that are really the most useful, because I don't want to go on a tangent with you. But say for example, there was a one study. I think it was the early 2000s, and I'm going to blow the names of these islands. I'm not even going to say them. There were two islands off the coast of Croatia, Pod something and Pod something else, right? We're just going to say Island 1 and Island 2, because I don't remember how to say the damn words, and I'll speak whatever they speak in Croatia. They had this population of lizards on this one island. And this island also had a lot of bugs. And so these lizards look like any old insectivorous animals. They look exactly as you'd expect. And some scientists took a group of those lizards off this one island, put them on another island that had no lizards and no big bug population, right? Came back 40 years later and went to island number 2 and checked these lizards, and they found that they had developed really wide jaws and really thick chewing muscles, and were getting better teeth, and had a totally new cecum, like new guts that they had developed, all because they were having to eat leaves. They were becoming more and more herbivorous. There were still enough bugs for them to survive, but they were having to eat a lot more leaves. And so their bodies were adapting to herbivory. They were getting wider heads and wider jaws and totally new intestines and cecums and shit in order to digest the leaves that they were eating. And genetic analysis showed that they were, in fact, the direct descendants of these other lizards from island number 1. Now, I don't know for sure if it was ever tested if they could interbreed with them. But the key here is that if those same changes had gone on long enough, absolutely that would have been the case. If those same changes that we saw over those just 40 years had continued, you would have had so much genetic variation there. You don't even need a different number of chromosomes. You would have had a prezygotic barrier where you would not have been able to blend this genome with the genome from the original island. That's called allopatric speciation. So this is just one example off the top of my head of the kind of thing that I'm talking about here, where yes, we have actually done experiments in the field showing, these animals actually changing over time, showing the species develop and adapt to a new environment, showing how natural selection works, and eventually that would lead to speciation. Does that make sense?
Yes, but according to the concept of evolution, if it hasn't been tested that they are reproductively isolated, then you're just speculating upon if speciation can actually happen, correct?
No, because that is the thing that causes speciation, is just like when you have a big enough genetic difference.
But it didn't make it all the way to the idea of the concept. It missed the mark of the concept, correct?
So I just want to be clear about it. What I just described is the definition of evolution. It fits the definition of the word. And also in terms of speciation, I don't know for sure if they ever did go back and check if they were reproductively isolated. It didn't matter to me to check that sort of thing, because that's not what the definition of species is. But there are a lot of things that make
definition than the concept for you, right?
No, I'm in the middle of explaining why. The major thing to remember here is that when we're talking about like the reproductive isolation, the genotype is just one part of that. There are actually several what we would call prezygotic and postzygotic barriers to reproduction that would cause that sort of thing. And so in this case, we're getting these major DNA changes that would then produce, I think I said prezygotic barrier earlier. If I did, I misspoke. That would be then a postzygotic barrier, where you would still have these species, these different populations, may be able to breed, but their offspring wouldn't be viable and or fertile because there are too many discrepancies between the two chromosomes, or between the two genomes. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So if that was able to be observed, then you could then say you have evidence of evolution to then say it's a fact, but you don't have any evidence because they didn't check.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I just want to clarify, like just the ability for like a branch, we're going to call it a species for now, to develop and then no longer be able to reproduce with their distant kin is not a requirement for evolution. It certainly does drive evolution, but it's certainly not a requirement. Like for example, if there's a branch that breaks off and then it's not. If there's a branch and they break off and then they move 4,000 miles away and they continue to reproduce and change, whether or not they can reproduce again with their ancestors that live 4,000 miles away has nothing to do with whether or not they're going to continue to evolve as a separate species.
Okay, so the mink has 30 chromosomes. The marten has 38 chromosomes. The
and now we're
ferret has 40
on random
chromosomes.
examples again.
The weasel has 42. Stout 44. American badger 33. Honey badger 40. Wolverine 42.
We're going through the entire
44.
Mustelidae family, y'all. We're listening to all the mustelids here.
Close. Well, I'm trying to give you guys some information, right?
To be sure, there is a 2009 study on the Galapagos finches that demonstrate that there were isolated species that developed between 2009 and 1981. They'd been studying these finches for a couple decades, and they did observe the thing you're asking for. They did observe that there were new species that developed that were no longer producing with the species they derived from.
That's Peter and Rosemary Grant's work on the Galapagos, by the way. They've been doing that for damn near a century. They've been going at this for a long time. And what they're describing is adaptive radiation, which does produce new species. That's what we're seeing with Galapagos finches in the Grant study.
Subspecies. Those are subspecies because they're not reproductively isolated.
Right? So Justin literally just said they were.
Just like subspecies.
Literally, if you read the article from Berkeley, it literally says several factors probably contributed to the isolation of the new lineage. That they're isolated.
Okay.
It's on the evolution.berkeley.edu website, straight from Berkeley.
Okay, no, so my point with all of the stouts and the weasels,
they're not isolated on a different island. That's moving the goalpost. So the question wasn't whether or not they were isolated to a new island. The question was whether or not they were isolated in that they can't reproduce with their prior species. So the location of the new species wasn't relevant to the question at hand.
You guys can't handle my question. It's too good. I take that as a great compliment.
You mean you're literally running from the...
You keep ignoring the definition of the words you're using in order to make an argument that makes no sense. And when Justin just met your criteria, you just ignored it and came up with a new thing that you wanted him to satisfy.
Yeah, you just got to go post on wheels. This is like the definition of bad faith discussion.
You can make a definition. Is making a definition arbitrary or not? Because I'm pretty sure it is.
So to be clear,
write this or that, it's arbitrary. What's non-arbitrary?
So to be clear, the point now is that the definition of evolution doesn't matter. And the definition of species doesn't matter. It's your preferred definition of the word species and evolution that we must satisfy in order to define evolution as a whole.
Do you want to find out what's real? That would be looking at things in a non-arbitrary way. Looking at someone's definition, which is written by man and put on Merriam-Webster.
I don't think he even knows what arbitrary means.
A concept you can't fathom?
That's weird. I have a totally different question that I just want to ask you really quickly.
Something written by man as though there's something outside of that. Do you think there's something written by God?
Do you understand what the word arbitrary means, sir?
So we're not going to answer that question either, huh?
So he's not going to answer it.
He can't answer that question. I take that as a great compliment.
My question about the marmot and the weasel.
I'm not, because Kevin, you're asking the same thing, which is just in a slightly different version of the same thing, where you're just misusing the word species and misusing the word evolution to try to come up with a new goal that doesn't make any sense. And what I think is really most important here is that a minute ago, I gave you an example of allopatric speciation. Justin just gave you an example of adaptive radiation. And in both of those cases, you said, well, you have to watch speciation happen in order to know for sure that it's possible. And only then will you accept evolution. Even if we were to agree to that concept, which again, isn't the definition of evolution. But even if we were to agree with that concept, I just want to know, why are you making it this statement that in order for evolution to be a fact, you must first watch this process happen? It's as if you're saying it's almost the exact same argument as when people say you can't observe macroevolution, therefore you can't say evolution is true. So what's the deal with that, and why isn't the concept of evidence good enough for you in this case?
I'll tell you why. When I was a young kid, I thought, can a deer and a crocodile have an offspring? That'd be terrifying, right? Thankfully, they cannot. There's this distinct species that cannot interbreed with one another. That's why I'm obsessed with understanding the chromosome number and the non-arbitrary definition of species. Don't give a fuck what Merriam-Webster says, because I'm looking at the actual non-arbitrary concept of speciation based upon genetic isolation. It's very simple.
Okay. Okay, and just to be clear, you do realize, I haven't said anything about Merriam-Webster. The definitions that I've been giving you are actually from the biology textbooks with which I earned biology degrees. So what you're saying here is you don't care about what actual people who study evolution for a living say. You're picking this new definition that you have decided upon, claiming that's not arbitrary, and then asking everything to meet that standard that you have arbitrarily produced, rather than actually looking at the actual evidence on the ground. That's what I'm hearing from you.
So it seems like most scientists call species subspecies, but when you actually look at the...
So we're just not going to answer that question either.
By Ernest Mayr. Ernest Mayr is a legit guy. You know about him.
It's Ernst, by the way. And also, I just asked a question that you failed to answer yet again, since apparently that's how we're counting points now. I'll just remind myself of that one. Yeah, the point that I'm trying to get across to you is the definitions of these words that you're using don't align with what actual biologists say, and like what we're actually teaching new scientists. But that aside, I'd really like to focus on the question that you keep dodging, which is, why is the concept of evidence such a difficult concept for you? Why are we having such a problem where you're saying I have to watch this thing start to finish in order to accept it, rather than looking at evidence for something happening and then building an understanding off of that evidence?
The species of animals on the earth is very steadfast. They do not change. If you
so we're going to ignore that question again. I'm going to ask the question again, Kevin, and we're going to see if we can get it out of you this time. Why is it not good enough to say that we have evidence for something rather than literally watching the whole process for the entire time? Right? I didn't watch the whole life of Abraham Lincoln from birth to death, but I know it happened because I have evidence for it. Similarly, I don't watch macroevolution, and you claim I haven't watched speciation, but I have evidence for these things. Why is evidence not a good enough metric for you here? Why do you think you have to watch something from start to finish?
You never accept a hypothesis. You only fail to reject it. You are always looking to prove yourself wrong, and you only move forward with an idea when you can't do that anymore. You ever heard of that?
I know. I literally taught that lesson on this show during this particular show.
That was a direct quote from you.
Yes, I've said that many times.
I'm telling you, I failed. I failed to accept it.
Okay, you just said you failed to accept it, which you just read a quote from me explaining why you don't accept things. You fail to reject them.
That's correct.
Okay, so you just have decided to not think, is what I'm hearing.
Not thinking would just be not calling in and discussing this.
You literally just quoted me to me about how you shouldn't accept things, you fail to reject them, and then you said I failed to accept it. Yeah, that's the point. Or am I like, what's happening? Also, you'd still haven't answered the question that I asked you about why you don't accept evidence for a claim, and you feel you need to watch the entire fucking process happen, which isn't reasonable. Do you believe, Kevin, that Pluto orbits the sun?
Yeah, I believe it.
Why?
Because someone said that, and I'll just accept it.
Okay, so here's a fun fact. We've never seen that happen. We have known about Pluto for less time than it takes for Pluto to orbit the sun. So we have never seen Pluto go all the way around the sun. But we have evidence that that's the case because we can track its trajectory, and we have evidence of how like orbital dynamics work. So we can use the evidence to build this conclusion, regardless of whether or not we've seen the whole process. Does that shake your faith in whether or not Pluto is orbiting the sun? Or do you think that we can use evidence to understand something rather than actually necessarily watching the whole thing happen.
Yeah, I see your point. And when I look at the animals, I see that they stay incredibly the same. All of their teeth stay the same. Their bone structure stays the same. Their chromosome number stay the same. So from
except for when they don't.
Excuse me, one second.
Except for when they don't, because we have several long-term experiments. Because we have several long-term experiments showing dramatic phenotypic change within species, including in humans.
Yeah, but do they change species?
And now we're right back to this, where you have to
point. You're trying to prove evolution, and you have to have species change to prove evolution. I don't get why I'm wrong here.
Kevin, I'm going to just summarize everything one more time, because it's been 34 minutes of you saying the same wrong thing. And we keep saying, hey, that's wrong. That's not what it is. And you say, yeah, but what about the wrong thing? And I need to get across to you just to make sure we're all on the same page. Make sure nobody can say that I didn't explain this. That's not what the definition of evolution is. And that's not how the concept of species works. And even if that was the case, even if evolution was defined as a change in species, and species was this purely set thing that means a change in reproducibility, whatever, even if what you were saying was true, we can still say we have evidence for this happening. We don't need to watch it happen. And I can sit here all day long, give you evidence after evidence after evidence that fits both your narrative and mine. So you're using these words wrong. And even if you were using them right, you would still be wrong about the conclusions.
So the call today was, is evolution a fact? And you can only suggest that evolution is true based upon trends. Therefore, you cannot prove it's a fact. Is that correct?
No. I can demonstrate that evolution is a fact because I can show evolution working in a way that matches the definition of the word. And also, as a functional theory, and also as a functional theory, it also has massive explanatory power. It makes novel testable predictions. It does all the other things that we associate with things that are indeed facts. So in so many ways and from so many different angles, evolution absolutely is a fact. The theory of evolution is the way that we explain and understand that fact. And what you have provided me for now 36 minutes and 43 agonizing seconds, Kevin, is that you don't understand the definition of evolution. You don't understand the evolution of species. You don't understand how evidence works. And in all other cases, you are willing to accept what actual qualified scientists say about a thing, whether or not you fully understand it, and willing to accept their definitions of words. But in this particular case, you think your definitions are better than the ones that are actually in introductory biology textbooks. And therefore, you reject all evidence for evolution because it hasn't been observed in the way you like.
Ernest Meyer,
that's not how thinking works.
So in the beginning of my call, I asked if you thought the definition of species was arbitrary, and I believe you said to some degree it is arbitrary.
Necessarily so.
It has to be arbitrary?
Because there is no set thing called a species out in nature. The animals aren't born with little ID cards telling them what. Not according to what?
Not according to Ernst Meyer.
Just really quickly, do you know what Ernst Meyer did for a living? Do you know who he was?
He was a biologist.
What kind of biologist was he? What did he specialize in? What were all of his books about? His most famous publications, what were they about?
I don't know, animals and shit.
Evolution. He was an evolutionary biologist. He was a very famous evolutionary biologist who helped us come to a better understanding of what evolution is and how it works. So just to be clear, you are misrepresenting him. You are misrepresenting his work. You are misrepresenting the definition of the word of the thing that you are trying to debunk. And you are misrepresenting the definition of the terms that you're using to try to debunk the thing you don't understand. And all of this is just reiterating my point that you are arbitrarily picking a concept that you don't like and making ridiculous goalposts that don't make any sense.
Can I say something? Ernest Meyer disagrees with you because you just said species is necessarily arbitrary. He clearly says there is a non-arbitrary definition of species, which I explained to you. How do you not get this? I'm so confused.
He doesn't disagree with me primarily because he's dead, but like, or at least I sincerely hope that he is, because they buried him quite a while ago. But like, the thing is, like, no, I'm sorry, that's just not how science works. That's just not how thinking works. And what's so important,
you say it
what's
is.
so important, Kevin, what's so important is that even if, and I can't stress this enough, you keep falling back into this same stupid hole, even if the definition of species you were giving me was accurate, and even if the top process of speciation that you're trying to lean on here was accurate, and even if the definition of evolution that you're operating on was accurate, you would still be wrong, and demonstrably so, and you still would be avoiding actual evidence for the actual fact of evolution. You still would be misrepresenting science, and you still would not be engaging in actual scientific thought.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I didn't know that trying to figure out what happens non-arbitrary is so egregious.
Nobody said that, and the fact that that's the talking point that you tried to derive from that demonstrates to me why you think the silly shit that you think. If you can't actually engage,
he doesn't even know what arbitrary means.
He doesn't, and it's weird. But like, just, I'm sorry, man. At the end of the day,
it's
like,
true without a definition. It means that whether you know about it or
that's not what it means.
That's not what arbitrary means. You want to try again?
Okay, something is non-arbitrary is something that is very steadfast and still. Whether you define it as one way or the other.
That's not what that means either.
What that means? You want to try again?
Hold on, let me Google it.
Yeah. You spent all this time arguing about an arbitrary definition. You don't even know what the definition of arbitrary is. You've been misusing that word the entire time you've been up here.
I've been trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think I can do it anymore.
Okay, let me give you this.
Something that's arbitrary is something that comes about by random chance rather than choice, or something that is done without thought or critical thinking. That's arbitrary.
Okay, non-arbitrary.
I'm going to move on because, Kevin, there are other callers that want to discuss evolution, and I think they might actually be serious. I'm at a point now where it's impossible to tell if you're actually just like your head is that far up your ass, or if you're just pretending like it is. But I encourage you just to literally, I mean this sincerely, go buy an introductory evolutionary biology textbook and just read the definition of the word species, the definition of the word evolution, what a species concept is, how evolution works, and just learn. Don't even do an evolution textbook. Get just an introductory, like, what is science for babies textbook, and learn how the scientific method works and how logical and evidentiary thinking works. That's where you need to start, because right now, this entire conversation is, I believe Pluto orbits the sun because somebody told me to, but I don't believe in evolution because I haven't watched one species change to the other, which is a ridiculous constraint that you would never put on anything else. It's dumb. With that, this is why you were banned, and we're done. Bye.
And once again, we have to apologize. Not all Kevins are like this, despite the fact that his name was not arbitrary.
Oh my God. It was so funny until it got frustrating.
Hey there, Eric. Noting that anyone watching that clip makes atrociously poor life decisions, where should they send their protection money to prevent further damage?
All protection money should be sent to patreon.com/calltheline, or else we will break your kneecaps.
Okay, we can't say that. I think we can't say that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hit like and subscribe.